Welcome to the second episode of the Jet Series NFL podcast. My name is DJ Demerit, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Ian O'Malley and Smitty. How we doing today, fellas?
Pretty good here today. I mean, it's as you can see, the sun's kind of trying to poke through the blinds back there. It's about 40 degrees up in Rhode Island, and so we're one day closer to spring every day.
Oh yeah, what's going on, guys? Beautiful day down here in Florida. Beautiful week. 80-degree weather all week. It's looking real good. DJ, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I love it down here. It's crazy to think less than a year ago we were up north in that Massachusetts or Rhode Island weather. Horrifying times, but now we've seen brighter days. We're in 62-degree weather here in Tampa right now. It's supposed to get up to about 80 later today. I'm loving it, man. It's amazing. All right, well, we're going to get started. First off, Smitty, how have you been? You been talking to our boy Howie Roseman lately or what? What's going on with that?
I talked to a lot of people from a lot of different teams, so I just got my sources. That's it. But in all seriousness, it's pretty obvious that they were going to move on from him. It's time to reshape the wide receiver room in Philadelphia, and you moved on from Carson Wentz. You're rolling with Jalen Hurts now. You want to surround him with guys that can, get deep, guys that can, that are young and that can hopefully live up to the hype that the Eagles draft them at.
Yeah, and you made those two good points about Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. Jackson no longer with Philadelphia, and Jeffrey not too far behind, if I'm speaking correctly. So it'll be fun to see what they do with that wide receiver room. Do you want to walk us through that real quick, or do you have any other thoughts on that situation over there?
If they're smart, I think they'll use the number 6 pick this year to get a guy in the round like Devonta Smith, Jamar Chase if they're sitting there. Obviously we all know what their cap situation is, so they're not going to be in the market for any of these high-priced guys that are going to be out there this year. So you ultimately have to roll, with the rookies in this class, and hopefully, Jalen Reagor, you spent the first-round pick on last year. Hopefully he'll, have a breakout year this year. You hope J.J. Arcega-Whiteside can turn into something. He's been very disappointing. So, you hope you can get some production out of those guys, and hopefully they'll come alive with, Jalen Hurts taking the role as QB1.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jalen Hurts QB1, and then you got, like you said, they're going to have to really address wide receiver in the draft because they don't have a lot of cap space, as we talked about last week. They're 31st in the league in cap space. So, like I said last week, there's 4 elite receivers. There's, you mentioned Devonta Smith and Jamar Chase. Obviously, Jalen Waddle is considered, arguably the best receiver in college football first half of the season, and then he broke his ankle, and it's still talked about as being drafted high, but we'll see how that is. I still think he could be an elite player in the league. And then don't forget about my guy, the tight end out of Florida, Kyle Pitts. I'm a grad student at the University of Florida, and I had a lot of fun watching Kyle Pitts catch touchdowns this year. And hopefully, I'm not having, as a Giants fan, hopefully I'm not having going to have to watch him catch passes with the Eagles.
Back to the basics. Got to root for the home roots.
Oh yeah.
All right, so we'll see how that situation plays, and we'll continue to cover that kind of stuff as it comes up, and we'll stay close to home with the Philly situation, and as we move closer to the draft. But getting back to last week as well, we touched on J.J. Watt. We touched on possible landing spots in Cleveland, in Green Bay, in San Francisco potentially. So what's going on with our boy right now? Where are we at with J.J. Watt?
Well, with JJ, there was a report on Twitter a couple of days ago. I think it was from John Clayton of ESPN in Seattle that there's 3 teams that are. It's kind of down to 3 teams where it's Green Bay, Buffalo, and Tennessee. All teams we talked about last week that are kind of in that Super Bowl window that think they can win this year. They could use one extra player. Especially, all 3 teams need one more pass rusher, right? So JJ Watt would be a perfect fit that way. But there's also a report that came out this morning that, there are several teams that are willing to offer him $15 or $16 million a year. Those 3 teams, because they have a lot of good players, they also don't have a ton of cap space. Green Bay is not a team that usually likes to spend a lot of money in free agency. When they do it all at once, like they did a couple of years ago with the Smith brothers and Billy Turner. Buffalo, I think Smitty, you just said they're at $1.5 million in cap space entering the year. Now, obviously, these GMs are so good. They know how to manipulate the cap, and the cap's not at its final number yet. So it remains to be seen there. Plus, we know every year there's always some cap casualties, right? Guys get cut, not because of their ability to play, but just because teams can't afford them anymore and they need to make other moves. And then Tennessee, I think Smitty's going to touch on in terms of what their cap space is. So usually teams that offer the most money in free agency are usually the bad teams. Jacksonville is the most cap space and the Jets have the second most cap space.
Right.
Now, both teams could use as many players as they can get. But as we talked about last week, why would J.J. Watt, who's closer to the end of his career than the beginning, why would he go to some of the worst teams in the league?
So you touch on these three teams that you just touched on where, those are the three final landing spots for J.J. Watt. They all have horrible cap situations. Green Bay's in the red. Buffalo's got $1.5 million, and Tennessee has less than $1 million. So the team that, by that report, the team that stands out to me the most offering him 15, 16 million is probably the Cleveland Browns. They have, they've been linked to him in the past. They have a little over 23 million to spend right now, according to Spotrac. So, they'll free up a little more space when they, slim down the roster a little bit. But, I think that's a team that'll definitely pay J.J. Watt, the money he wants. And it gives him an opportunity to chase a ring. And you can team him up with Myles Garrett. And, Myles Garrett will get most of the, most of the double teams. And then J.J. Watt will just be on single coverage and he'll be able to eat all year long. So I think Cleveland's probably the best fit for him to get paid and to have the opportunity to chase a ring.
Well, let's talk about the three teams on that table real quick, because you have Buffalo, who was one game away from going to the dance this past year, who some argued was at Casey's caliber. We didn't feel like it in the AFC Championship, couldn't establish a run. Might have been a better game for Tampa, been a better matchup for Tampa. You have Tennessee, who's the clear favorite in that division coming out last year. We talked about Derrick Henry a little bit last week. Ryan Tannehill starting to feel comfortable. And that Tennessee team looks a whole lot different with Mike Vrabel there. They've done a great job putting together a quote-unquote program over the last couple of years. Both good landing spots for him. And then, we talk third on the list as far as Green Bay's concerned. I'm sorry, just a stupid moment. They were almost there. We're the second best team in the NFC this past year. It might be one player away from going to the Super Bowl in the 2021 season. So what are your thoughts specifically team by team? Where does he benefit most? And if J.J. Watt is acquired by one of these three teams, who has the best chance of now winning a Super Bowl this next year?
Well, I would say Green Bay, because I think they're the best of the three teams. I mean, you look at, obviously both Green Bay and Buffalo went to the championship game, but Buffalo is kind of outclassed by Kansas City. And Green Bay wasn't outclassed by Tampa. I mean, they were one stop away from getting the ball back. They were also one stop away from going into halftime, only being down 4 points instead of 11 points. And as it turned out, that touchdown Tampa scored before halftime ended up being the difference in the game. So you put J.J. Watt in Green Bay, I would pick them to go to the Super Bowl right now. And obviously it's tough to make predictions on February 25th, but I would say that Green Bay would probably be the best team in the NFC in 2021 with J.J. Watt going on the team in the next few minutes. Now, obviously, as we talked about with the cap space, that's difficult. But if they can make it happen, I think for all the reasons I mentioned last week and so far this week, that's the move to make.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that as well. I think Green Bay out of those three teams definitely does make the most sense. And they have some different ways they could free up some cap space to make that happen. But they also have to address a number 2 wide receiver need. And they've been linked to Will Fuller, and he's not going to come at a cheap price. So, if you're the Packers, you do have the Smith brothers. You do have a pretty okay defense. You need some help in the secondary and stuff, but you kind of got to decide whether you want to pay Will Fuller in free agency or you want to bring in J.J. Watt. If I'm Green Bay, I'd probably pass on J.J. Watt and bring in a guy like Will Fuller. You know, you pissed off Aaron Rodgers last year by drafting Jordan Love in the first round. You didn't get him any weapons to speak of. You know, luckily he's got Devontae Adams, but you know, and as much as Devontae Adams gets double teamed, he still finds a way to make it happen. But you know, you gotta get Aaron Rodgers another guy he can throw to. You gotta surround him with more weapons, and I think that's what the path that the Packers ultimately take.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point because it's, a number 2 receiver, a viable option, is the difference between going to the Super Bowl and being a runner-up in the NFC Championship game. And we also got to talk too. They're losing another weapon. It's not. I don't know if that's official yet, but there are talks about Aaron Jones. Do you want to touch on that real quick, as far as how that might contribute to the Packers' decision to go after Watt or to pass on him?
Well, I think Aaron Jones probably wants to get paid, but I think he also knows that he's playing next to Aaron Rodgers, and you know he has a chance to compete for a championship every year. And now Miami's on their way. He's been linked to Miami, I should say, mutual interest there, and you know Miami's got Myles Gaskin. I don't know if Miami would be a team to pay a running back $12 million a year, $13 million a year. You know, especially at that position, it's a position that loses value quickly, and there's plenty of options in the draft that you can get, and there's plenty of other cheap guys that'll be out there that you can get. So I don't necessarily think the Dolphins will do it, but if Aaron Jones is chasing money, some team will do it. But I think he'll ultimately come back on maybe even a franchise tag type thing, a transitional tag. I think he'll eventually come back to Green Bay and at least for one more year, and say, all right, let's try it one more year. If it doesn't work out, we'll go our separate ways.
See,
he is a valuable piece to that offense. So.
He is a valuable piece to that offense, but they did just draft A.J. Dillon. So I mean, they drafted A.J. Dillon in the second round for a reason. And you'll see teams do this where they'll pick a player at a position where they're stacked at that position. Green Bay's got Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams. Aaron Jones is the top back, and Jamal Williams is a good change of pace back. Why would you draft your third string running back in the second round? Well, Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams are both free agents. So, like you said, Smitty, it's once you give running backs that second contract, you usually don't get the same value in that second contract that you got from the first one. I mean, Tennessee with Derrick Henry, he had 2,000 yards in the first year of the contract, but we'll see. It remains to be seen what he does the next 3 years. I think Dallas probably regrets the Zeke deal. All right. They probably regretted that as soon as they did it. I mean, they gave Zeke $15 million a year for 6 years. And did he even have 1,000 yards last year? I think he did, but it took till week 17 to get 1,000 yards.
He didn't find the end zone at all.
He didn't find the end zone.
Very rarely.
Very rarely. So, and especially Green Bay, where they're in the red, they don't spend a lot of money on free agents as it is. They're probably going to let Aaron Jones walk. I mean, maybe they'll franchise tag him, but I see him going somewhere else. And Miami's a good fit because they need a running back. That's a good team that, they were 1 win away from going to the playoffs. They were 6th in the league defensively, and actually they were first up until week 17, until the disaster they had week 17. So, you got a good defense there. You got a team that wins games. You got Brian Flores, who looks to be a good coach in his first 2 years. So Miami's a good fit for Aaron Jones. Now, whether they want to pay him $12 or $13 million a year, who knows? Because Brian Flores comes from New England, where they didn't pay running backs. Right. They just let running backs go. If like LeGarrette Blount led the league in rushing touchdowns in 2016, had almost 1,200 yards, and they let him walk. They didn't even offer him a contract in 2017.
They're a dime a dozen in their eyes, and that's kind of that Belichick way.
And the nice thing about Brian Flores is that he's not Bill Belichick. He's not trying to be Bill Belichick. He's Brian Flores. But there are still definite similarities between the Patriots and the Dolphins, and that's with, every assistant coach that leaves his head coach and goes to another program, especially one with the stature of Bill Belichick.
Right. It becomes systemic at that point in time. You adopt a set of beliefs and values, and you kind of carry those on to your new team. You might make a few tweaks, but, the ideology is the same.
Absolutely.
So speaking of, let's get back to JJ for a second. So, we've potentially X'd out Green Bay. I personally am going to go on a hunch and say I think he ends up in Buffalo. I think that team is one piece away from going to the dance next year, as I said earlier. We also have to look at the division on who's coming up next on our list as well. So we'll get to that in a few. Any last points on the JJ Watt, on the rumors and potential landing spots, or?
No, not really. But I think an announcement is probably coming sooner than later on where he'll play. Probably before the start of the new league year, he'll come to terms with the team.
So probably in that next 2-week window.
I would agree with that, and that's the benefit of him being released when he was, because he could find a team sooner. Free agents that get released before the league year starts can find a team as soon as they're released, because they're technically not free agents. They're not free agents whose contracts are ending. They're free agents who they still have a contract. JJ Watt was just released from his contract because he had no guaranteed money left. And if the $15 to $16 million reports are true, then he is only going to be one or 2 million short of what he would have been making in Houston, and he'll most likely be on a better team, such as Cleveland.
Right. All right. Well, let's flip over. So one of the potential landing spots we talked about with JJ last week, and we've been hearing about, is Pittsburgh. So what's going on in Pittsburgh right now, boys?
Well, you got Ben, who he's under contract this year for $41 million, and we watched Ben Roethlisberger in the last. Really, I mean, if you watch Ben Roethlisberger, and since December or Thanksgiving weekend of 2018, he hasn't played like a big time quarterback. Kind of since the friction between him and AB just became so bad that their relationship was damaged beyond repair. And really, since that moment, Ben has not been a top quarterback in the league. I mean, the first half of this year, I guess statistically, he was a top 10 guy, but most people didn't take it seriously. And the Steelers were the worst 11-0 team that I've ever seen. And, it proved itself in the last 6 games when they lost 5 of them. So you watch Roethlisberger, kind of over the last 2.25 years, he's not worth $41 million. So then what do you do if you're Pittsburgh? Do you cut him, or do you stick with him, or do you restructure? What do you do? So they decided to restructure his contract, which I think is the best course of action. And the reason why I think is the best course of action is because, they signed Dwayne Haskins. They have Mason Rudolph on the roster, who
they trust to an extent.
They trust to an extent, but let's be honest. I don't even think he's a good backup. He's not a bad backup. He could come in, he knows the offense, but that's the extent of what you're going to get out of Mason Rudolph. Dwayne Haskins has the ability to play well, big arm, can move a little bit for his size, but he's not going to run down a fit. That's the thing. It's up here.
Right.
It's up here, and it's also in here too. Does he want it bad enough? He was playing for his hometown team, his favorite team that he was rooting for growing up, Washington. And he threw that opportunity away. And he had every opportunity to win a job. And Ron Rivera could just never commit to him. Now, he had some things working against him when he got drafted because the owner picked him.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the football people in Washington at the time, Bruce Allen, who was the president, and Jay Gruden, who was the head coach, said, no, we don't want Dwayne Haskins. But of course, Daniel Snyder can't keep himself out of the first round of the draft room. And he decided that they were going to pick Dwayne Haskins. That's what happens when owners pick players. That's why Dallas hasn't been a good team in 25 years. So you have Haskins there, where all of the people who are handling him don't want him there. There were questions even coming from his college coach, Urban Meyer, about could he handle the NFL from a maturity standpoint right away anyway. So you have that combined with the overall dysfunction that's been in Washington over the last 20-plus years. Plus, he's on a bad team. All that equaled Dwayne Haskins being a bust in Washington. Now, we've seen guys be a bust in one place, go to another place, and play well. In fact, it's happened in Pittsburgh. They had a guy back in 2002 named Tommy Maddox, who was drafted in the early 90s to be the heir apparent to John Elway in Denver, kind of flamed out, bounced around the league, and then ended up in Pittsburgh. They had to bench Cordell Stewart, put Tommy Maddox in, they won the division. And Tommy Maddox actually was their quarterback before Ben Roethlisberger, believe it or not. But, going back to what's currently going on in Pittsburgh, you got Haskins and Rudolph on the roster. I mean, what are your other options? They weren't really in on Carson Wentz because they hadn't decided what they were going to do with Ben. I mean, Mitchell Trubisky is going to be available as a free agent, but I don't think he's better than Roethlisberger. Sam Darnold is probably going to be available by trade, or could be available by trade, and I've been a big Sam Darnold guy, but he's been bad as an NFL player.
He's also one of the ones who's been in a bad environment as well. Sam Darnold.
So to Haskins, I would say that Darnold's more mature than Haskins, but yeah, the environment has hurt him. So really, restructuring Roethlisberger's contract, which they decided to do, was the best thing for them to do because he is their best option in 2021.
100%. Ian, you make a good point. They had to restructure his contract in order to bring him back. There was no other way you could do it, and both sides knew that. And like you said, Big Ben does give the Steelers the best possibility to win in this upcoming season. They got the 24th overall pick. Not going to be anybody there for them to draft and bring in right away to start. Who knows what they have in Dwayne Haskins. Mason Rudolph isn't the answer. He's not even a backup, like you said. So Pitt made the right decision. And Big Ben made the right decision because he doesn't want to go play anywhere else. If he's going to have to go learn another system, he's just going to hang it up. So he gets to play in the building he's been in his whole career. He's made more money than fucking most people do. Excuse my language. So he's fine. I think he'll come back on a cheap deal, and they'll be able to surround him with a couple guys. And I think he's a great mentor for Dwayne Haskins if they see anything for him in the future. Big Ben's not a bad quarterback to learn behind.
For sure. That's not a bad, point A to point B. And Ryan Tolner, Big Ben's agent, did say he was asked to come back as a starter for Pittsburgh. So we know there's going to be a little bit of veteran coaching in there. See how Big Ben comes out and plays. And then, hey, do we dump it off? Do we pass the torch to Dwayne Haskins? Can he play at this level? Is this feasible for us, or do we need to seek other options in free agency, which is going to put them in some deep doo-doo at that point in time? But you also have to look at the big picture in that division, right? Because you have Baltimore who's playing, pretty well, all things considered. You got Joe Burrow coming back for Cincy, and you have Cleveland who just beat you 2 weeks in a row. I know one without your starters, but in that playoff loss, that was pretty embarrassing for what it's worth. So that's it. These are questions they need to figure out the answers to and figure out, okay, is Big Ben a viable starter? We've told him he is. Okay, so now are we going to be able to play to that same, 10-6, 11-5 that we've been playing at, or we played at this past year? And can we get to a divisional round, or can we at least get to a wild card round? I don't see them winning that division.
To the third best team in that division.
Right now,
the Browns leading the way.
Browns, Ravens, Steelers. Steelers at 3. And we had this conversation during the season when they started off 5-0, and I said, they're still not that good. And you say, what do you mean? Well, they're still not that good. They didn't prove it. They were playing a very easy schedule. I think they got the ball rolling early, but, you see when they play better teams, and we really saw it in that playoff game as well, that they just weren't a playoff caliber team. They were a good regular season team. After that, there was nothing for them. I didn't see them competing with Buffalo. I didn't see them competing with anyone in the NFC if they were to go to the dance. So, but walk us through what this next season looks like now.
Well, I mean, like we said, they're the third best team in the division. I mean, we could argue Browns or Ravens, but I mean, it's splitting hairs. You watch the Monday night game that they played towards the end of the season. Ravens, I mean, they beat them by 5 at the end. But the Browns had the lead for most of that game. And the Browns, I'd say, were more impressive in their playoff loss than the Ravens were against a better team.
Right.
So, you go and we'll have plenty of time to go back and forth on Browns and Ravens. The Bengals are still a ways away. Who knows how good Joe Burrow is going to be when he comes back? Zach Taylor, I think, had a good year. He had a pretty good year as the Bengals head coach, but he's entering year 3 as a head coach. So he's going to start winning some games.
Right.
The rebuild can't take forever. Offensive line's a mess in Cincinnati, so they gotta do what they can to fix the offensive line. Kind of similar in a similar position where the Giants were last year at Daniel Jones, where it's like offensive line's been bad forever. We've been rebuilding forever. At some point, that's got to get fixed. So, I mean, when you look at Pittsburgh, I mean, yeah, they're the third best team in the division. But if, some of those things click and if they improve those areas in Cincinnati, I wouldn't be surprised if Pittsburgh's fourth. I mean, one, how good is Ben? Yeah, he'll probably be, depending on the schedule, if they have an easy schedule again at the start of the season, then yeah, he'll probably play well and they'll get some wins that will make them look better than they are. If the schedule's not as easy, then they'll probably lose some more games than they did at the beginning of last year, and maybe Ben never gets it going, and then at some point they move off Ben. Pittsburgh's kind of bent over backwards for Ben. They've gotten everybody out of there that's had issues with Ben, whether it's been AB, Lev Bell, coaches that have had problems there. Todd Haley, anybody that's had a problem with Ben, they've been shipped out, and now they're just stuck with Ben. And what are you really getting out of Ben? I mean, so the window is closer to the Super Bowl window is closed. The playoff window, that remains to be seen. But honestly, I'd rather see some of these other teams get in, just because I know Pittsburgh's going to go lose and they're not going to look good doing it. At least if Miami gets in, I haven't seen them. Brian Flores, did Tua have a better year? That defense, that could be a little something. Plus, I think Dolphin fans would be excited because their team, they haven't, I mean, the last two times Miami's been in the playoffs, they haven't had a real chance to win.
Right.
And so, Miami Dolphin fans haven't really felt like they've had a chance to win in the playoffs since Dan Marino's been the quarterback. So, that would be interesting. Can the Raiders get it going with Chucky? That the NFL is better when the Raiders are good because they're one of the big brands in the league and they've been dormant for a long time. I mean, at least the Chucky, they've been talked about, but can you imagine the Raiders in Vegas with Chucky as the head coach in a playoff game?
It would be unreal.
It would be unreal. We'd be talking about that would be one of our favorite things to talk about, even if we felt like they had no chance to win.
Seriously.
So,
it starts in their quarterback room.
It does. Well, Derek Carr had a good year last year, and he's getting better now under John Gruden. But Derek Carr was already, Derek Carr had some good years before Chucky got there. But, I think they're getting more on the same page now, and it seems like they're finally committed to Derek Carr. So that's good. But we'll talk about that later on. Yep. But yeah, just going back to Pittsburgh, I'm not excited to watch them this year. They're going to lose Bud Dupree in free agency. They're a team that's had salary cap problems for years because with Ben, you have to try to at least make an attempt to win a Super Bowl, or at least make it look like you're in a Super Bowl window, because why are you going to have a close to 40-year-old quarterback if you're not?
Right.
But it's probably set them back in other areas. I mean, yeah, TJ Watt's the best edge defender in the league right now. Their front seven, one of the better front sevens in the league. Minka Fitzpatrick's a great safety. But Marquise Pouncey retired. He was the rock on that offensive line, and the offensive line even last year wasn't as good as it had been previously.
Well, they couldn't run block to save their lives last year.
They were the worst running team in the league, so they can't run the ball. I don't like this. I don't love their skill position players. Roethlisberger's getting up there. So I'm just really not excited to watch Pittsburgh this year, even though what they did gave them their best chance to win.
They need to be able to, run the ball if they want Big Ben back there, because Big Ben cannot move around the pocket to save his life this year. He's not very accurate. He can still chuck the ball, but he might be losing Juju Smith-Schuster this year. He doesn't really have a tight end. Doesn't have an offensive line with Pouncey retiring, and their left tackle, Andrew Villario, he's a free agent. So they definitely need to establish that line, and they need to be able to run the ball. And James Conner, free agent this year. So who are they going to bring in to replace him, or are they going to bring him back? So.
Yeah, I mean, their salary cap problems have been so bad in recent years that they've almost not even had enough money to sign their draft class. So I think anybody that's a free agent, they're probably letting them go and then just filling the rest with rookies. And Ben's not going to like it, but he's going to have to deal with it, because at some point you have to tell Ben no. I mean, yeah, bring Ben back, because like we said, it gives you your best chance to win, but you need some breathing room financially.
But for sure, and just going back to Roethlisberger for a second, I think if he doesn't produce this year and he ends up getting benched, this will be his last year in Pittsburgh or anywhere for that matter.
I think this is his last year, regardless.
Regardless,
like, one final year, and then hang him up.
Just don't see them playing past a certain level. I mean, you went from having Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and then James Conner being the guy, being able to hit guys like McSchuster, and all of a sudden you can't get a running game going. You can't play action off of it. You still have, like you said, you still have the ability to throw the ball. You have one of the better front seven in the league, but it's not all coming together. You're losing games you shouldn't be losing down the stretch. And it's apparent they are the third best team in that division, and that's not a division you want to be third in. When you got Miami and Buffalo blowing up, you got Indy now making a run for it with Carson Wentz, you got Tennessee playing some good football, and then you still got Kansas City in the West, who's that powerhouse and who's the dominant team in the AFC, and then you got Vegas, who's not too far behind them. They beat them during the regular season. That's a rivalry game, but they're one of 3 teams to beat KC during the season. Postseason included. So we do got to keep an eye out there. That's going to be a fun wild card picture, though, when it comes down to it in the season. We'll kind of get there as the season progresses, and we see who drafts who and where teams are at come OTAs and going into camp. But anything else you guys want to add in that Big Ben Pittsburgh take?
I'd say don't forget about the Chargers too in that wild card mix. I know we're not there yet, but Justin Herbert looks like the real deal.
He's a guy.
Great defense over there too. So
yeah.
A lot of weapons. We'll see what they do if they can bring Hunter Henry back. They can keep Hunter Henry. That'll make Justin Herbert very happy. As it should.
If they can get a left tackle, I mean that roster is almost complete.
It's a tough division to win in, but it will be fun to see. I will say that. All right, we'll segue on to our boy Deshaun Watson. All right, so we have 3 teams that he has accepted trades with as far as potential landing spots. So do you guys want to dive into that, where he might end up and why?
I mean, 3 most obvious teams: Dolphins, Jets, Panthers. They all have, a flood of picks. They all have young guys that they could trade away. A team that sticks out to me that I think can do it quick and can give the most attractive offer is the Dolphins. 4 picks in the top 50 this year. They got the number 3 overall pick, which will most surely be included in any Watson deal. You can send him Tua. I think they are able to offer the most attractive package for him. But the Jets, they have a ton of picks. But the Jets, you have so many holes. Do you really want to trade your 3 first-round picks away when you could be using those picks to fill other holes in a roster that needs it? And then you got the Panthers, who, can include Teddy Bridgewater. They got a couple of young pieces they can include in there, like Brian Burns, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. So all 3 teams can make a run at it, but I think the Dolphins will come away with them if the Texans do want to, start listening to some offers.
Well, what the Texans said is that if they trade Deshaun, they want to be in position to get the second best quarterback in the draft. So that's so when you talk about the second best quarterback in the draft, that's kind of going back and forth between Zach Wilson from BYU and Justin Fields from Ohio State. So if you're going to want to be in position to do that, you got to get up to probably the best place to guarantee that would be pick number 2. Because you'll be in position at pick number 2 where the Jags pick Lawrence. You'll control the draft from there on out. So that's the Jets. Now, selfishly, as somebody who was born in the New York area, and I am a Giants fan, but I also I root for the Jets too. I would like to see Deshaun go to the Jets simply because, the 2 New York teams have been the 2 worst teams in the league the last 4 years, record-wise. It's just been bad football Sunday after Sunday for years. I mean, you guys remember me this season. I was hooting and hollering because the Giants won their 3rd game of the year in week 10. Hey, they almost didn't lose to Dallas. They almost didn't lose to Philly. That Tampa game was close on Monday night. Just enough of that.
Right.
And I think the Jets, obviously, and we'll talk about the Giants and the moves they have to make, as we get closer to free agency in the draft, because the Leonard Williams report came out this morning that they're far apart on a contract. Of course, I wasn't happy to see that. But then you got with the Jets, Deshaun Watson likes Robert Saleh. He wanted the Texans to interview Robert Saleh. They didn't do it. They do have a good young left tackle. They're entering his second year, Mekhi Becton, who's like 6'7", 360, mountain of a man, mauler in the run game, and is only going to get better as a pass protector, especially now with better coaching. And now they're in that, that Shanahan offense, which is zone blocking. Doesn't require a ton out of your offensive line, but just, be able to move from one spot to another. And Mekhi Becton, even at his size, has great feet. And that's very important for an offensive lineman. So you got that, they're dead at the skill positions. I don't like any of their running backs. I don't like any of their receivers. I think Jamison Crowder's a free agent. The rest of the offensive line isn't very good, but they have a decent interior defensive line. Quinnen Williams played like a third overall pick last year. We didn't hear a lot about him because the team was bad. And, Marcus May is a free agent at safety. I hope they franchise him because I think he can be the leader on that team that everybody thought Jamal Adams was going to be. This team will be better coached, or at least they should be better coached than they were last year. And we saw the Jets last year. I mean, when they were 0-13, I thought they were the worst team I'd ever seen. I mean, they were just bad in every sense of the word. But, you get Deshaun there, it immediately gets the fan base excited. It'll get everybody in that building excited, like, hey, we have a top 5 or 6 quarterback in the league now. We can win. Where even if we're not the best team every Sunday, which they still won't be going into most games. You got Deshaun. You're not feeling like, hey, we can beat Buffalo. We can beat Miami. New England's been beating our brains in for 20 years. In fact, if you're the Jets with Deshaun, you think you're better than New England now. So I think the Texans, and again, they don't want to trade him, but if they do, the Jets are the place they'd want to send him to the most. And look, like I said, selfishly, I'd like to see it.
Well, that's a great point, too, because you look at the Jets and you look at the most viable as far as pick options and getting that number 2 quarterback on the board in this year's draft. My issue is if you're New York, what do you do with Darnold? Is Houston interested in Sam Darnold? Are they only interested in draft picks? And to what price are you going to have to shell out draft picks in order to acquire Deshaun Watson? I think if you're giving them 2 first-rounders, which is what Matt Stafford went for, you might have to throw in a third. It might be Sam Darnold in the first. We don't know how that's going to go down. That's where my curiosity comes in is, if you're New York, are you overpaying for him to the extent that you cannot surround him with weapons, and now you're back to square one where you were in the 2018 season with Sam Darnold? And, I mean, he had Robbie Anderson and Jamison Crowder, but kind of back to square one. So how do they think they address that? What should New York be looking to give up in order to acquire Deshaun Watson, and where do you think Sam Darnold ends up in all this?
I mean, any team acquiring Deshaun Watson is going to cost them 3 first-round picks plus players. So the Jets 3 first-round picks plus Darnold, and maybe even another pick or another player. And I think that's kind of what the Texans want in return, and I think somebody will do it. Watson, not many players become available via trade like Watson. So some team will break the bank on it, especially a team that, has the draft capital to do it. So,
yeah, another clear front runner as far as cap space goes. Now, let's kind of flip the scale for a second because we're talking about division rivals. Now, if Miami goes after him, what are we looking at here? You're looking at Tua and what else? Is it going to be Tua and 2 first-rounders? Is it going to be Tua and a first-rounder? What do we look at? How does that trade structure kind of break down?
Well, with the Texans, they said they don't want another quarterback in return. They want the ability to get the quarterback that they want. So
okay.
what it really depends on, because it would be advantageous for them to get 2, because then to get the second pick with the Jets, because then they can decide whoever they want. I mean, because then they're guaranteed to get whoever they want after that. So let's say he goes to Miami. then it would really depend. You know, they send Deshaun to Miami, they get the 3rd pick, which actually was their pick that they traded to Miami for Laramie Tunsil. So that would be what that is. But, you know, the Jags are taking Trevor Lawrence. So the Jets, it comes down to what they think about Sam Darnold, as well as either Zach Wilson or Justin Fields. Because, again, people are going back and forth on Zach Wilson and Justin Fields. Zach Wilson has the edge right now. Fields had the edge previously. And people are starting to develop their questions now about Zach Wilson. You know, you usually don't want to be the guy that's hot early in the process, because as you get later in the process, you're going to fall back. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Justin Fields overtake Zach Wilson again. So, again, if Houston gets the 3rd pick, yeah, they'll probably take Tua in return, even though they don't really want him. I think they should.
Absolutely.
And even the same thing with the Jets. Take Darnold in return and draft a guy, because then whoever loses the job, you trade that one.
Right. You have a little bit of equity,
Insurance.
quote unquote. Yeah, insurance equity at the end of the season, or even during the season before the trade deadline. So I wonder how that all shakes up. In Miami, it's a little bit different, I think, because they don't have a top. They don't have the same level of 1st-round pick that New York has. They're not going to be getting Justin Fields or Zach Wilson if they trade with Miami. They're going to be getting Tua. Go ahead.
Well, if they trade with the Jets, and again, because if the Jets decide to stick with Darnold, then both Wilson and Fields are available.
Right.
Let's say the Jets take Wilson, which is where most people are predicting to go right now. You know, if Houston thinks Fields is better, then you have the opportunity to take Fields. So it really comes down to how the teams evaluate these quarterbacks. And the 3 quarterbacks, as we said, are involved are Sam Darnold, or the 4, Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, and Tua. So really it's
Teddy Bridgewater we mentioned as well, but
that's Teddy Bridgewater too, but you're not going to have a chance to get, you're probably not going to get either Wilson or Fields if you're picking 8th.
Right.
So that's why they want to be picking 2nd or 3rd. So it really comes down to how these teams, both the Jets and the Texans, evaluate these quarterbacks.
Any thoughts or comments on that, Smitty?
If the Dolphins want Watson, I think it'll cost 2, maybe 3 1st-round picks and Tua. You know, if I'm Miami, I'm not thinking twice. I'm pulling that deal. You know, you had Tua play off and on all year. If you're stuck with Ryan Fitzpatrick for the whole year, you probably would have made the playoffs. So, you know, I think there is some serious question marks around Tua. I don't know if Miami is 100% sold that he is the guy. So why not go get yourself a guy like Watson? You know, Miami lands Watson. I think they're probably the favorite to win the East, you know, and they can definitely make a Super Bowl run. So if I'm the Dolphins, I'm going all in on it.
And that's going to be awesome. That's a key component to be competing with Buffalo next year as well. Those 2 teams, I think, are going to have some battles in those 2 games. I'm excited to see who comes out on top in that division, but I'm more excited to see where Deshaun Watson ends up, because he's going to change the dynamic of the league, especially in the AFC. Granted, if he goes to the AFC East, I don't see him going to Carolina, like you just said. There's not enough trade bait there for the Houston Texans. And I know it's a matter of what Deshaun wants, but at the end of the day, it's really what Houston wants. What are we getting in return? How are we benefiting, and how are we growing as an organization? And I don't see them doing that in Carolina. I do see them doing that if they trade with New York, and I can see it in Miami as well. But 3 1st-rounders in Tua, that's a lot to ask for. I don't think it ends up being as significant of a deal. I think maybe 2 1st-rounders, maybe a 2nd or 3rd and Tua, but I don't think you get 3 1st-rounders in Tua. But we'll see. We'll see.
I think Deshaun Watson, he obviously wants to win, and Miami gives him the best shot to do it right away.
Out of the 3, no questions asked. I think New York doesn't give him a chance, because you still got to beat Buffalo and Miami. And if you don't know what New England's going to look like, I mean, obviously their quarterback room is having some issues right now, and they're kind of in the abyss as far as New England's concerned, or they've been over the past 2 decades. You still got 3 teams to beat in that division, and even if you have Deshaun Watson, I don't see you beating 2 of them. Or at least I don't see you sweeping 2 of them. I see maybe splitting with Miami and getting swept by Buffalo, and maybe splitting with New England. But in Carolina, you know, I still don't think you have a shot at that division. I still think you got Tampa Bay over there, who's going to play some great football next year, and then you still got New Orleans, who has something to prove with or without Drew Brees. I really think the only landing spot that makes sense from a Deshaun Watson perspective is Miami. But again, from a team perspective, if I'm Houston, my number one objective is to be trading with the New York Jets in that scenario.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. And for the same reason I've been saying is that, you then control the draft at number 2.
Right.
So if you can get, if you can have your pick, you then don't have to hope that the Jets pick the guy that you don't want.
All right. I think we've covered everything for today. Do you guys have any last minute things you want to add to the pod?
I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm good too. I mean, I think we discussed everything that needs to be discussed. I know we're going to have some free agency news coming up in the next couple of weeks, and obviously franchise tags coming up. Dak, who we didn't get to today. So, I mean, it's the never-ending story. I said to you 2 years ago, Deej, like Dak's the next guy to get a contract extension. He still hasn't gotten his contract extension. So at some point, he's either going to get extended or he's not. But one day, this story will be over.
And one day we'll be able
to. Got to make a decision. Extend him or cut him. Get rid of him. Let him move on.
Right. Just tagging him year after year. One day we'll be able to cover what actually happens in Dallas. I'm really excited for that day. And I want to thank all the listeners too for showing your support on the pilot episode of the podcast last week. We surpassed our initial goal, which is awesome. It's been fun so far. We're loving it, and just keep listening for news. Hit us up in the comments section on YouTube. Reach out to us on social media. Get a hold of us however you can. We'd love to hear your feedback. So, all right, guys, that's all I got for you.
That's it.
All right. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on episode 3 of the Jet Series NFL podcast.